Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to part 3 of my review series on Squid Game. I will be covering Squid Game Season 2 after it comes out, so stay subscribed for future Squid Game content. I also review Doctor Who and Black Mirror and whatever other TV shows and movies happen to captivate my interest. Now, without further ado, let's get on with the review. When I was watching episode 6, I made this little note that said, "Everything goes downhill from here." I was mostly wrong. It's such a bitter pill to swallow knowing that only 3 of the 456 original contestants remain by this episode's conclusion. Though I will say it feels slightly convenient that the 3 survivors would happen to be these 3. Almost like it was divine providence or something. I thought this guy had a really fitting send-off, darkly reflecting the atheistic nature of South Korean people. Just as hilarious is the fact that the characters all have to take their shoes off before embarking on their final journeys. Like it would bloody matter.
차례대로 신발을 벗고 다리 위로 올라가세요.
Shoes on, mister. Shoes on. He's out of control.
So yeah, this game is utterly terrifying. Despite my love of hiking, heights actually give me the willies. My feet felt so wobbly when I watched this sequence. I even found myself watching like a hawk to see which panels were to be avoided, giving me a sense of empathy with the characters. Even the short-lived minor characters we meet and bid farewell to in this episode don't feel like NPCs for the most part. The one I felt for the most was the one who calculated the likelihood of surviving this game. You couldn't get me to figure out 2 to the power of 15 in that small amount of time, but somebody with a mind like that essentially throwing themselves away is just damn tragic. The likelihood of survival for him and the others is so small and unlikely, but the most sinister aspect for me is that the odds got better when more people were sacrificed. This factor culminated with Sang-woo's dreadful killing of the glass expert. He looked so damn ominous, drenched in darkness, a very obvious way to illustrate him being a shadow of his former self. Even the glass expert himself not piping up about his occupation was an apt illustration of these people's transformed personalities. One by one, the contestants lose their humanity to be the sole winner of the games to gain the maximum winnings. Minyo and Doksu's end was super satisfying too. I haven't spoken much about the latter because I find him to be quite cartoony, but he did serve to strengthen Minyo as a character. I would believe that, given the circumstances, somebody, male or female, would cling to the physically strongest person for survival. The other aspect of this episode that had me filled with intrigue was the introduction of the VIPs. We finally get to see those that are not only responsible for the creation of the games, but also those that get the most enjoyment out of them. They're all unanimously loathsome creatures with some fairly flavorless dialogue. Most of the time, they're only making small talk, like the surface level observations, recalling previous games, and the bets they made on certain players.
What convinced you to bet so much on number 69?
Oh, it's such a beautiful number, 69.
Oh, you dirty dog.
However, I think this is the point. None of them want to give away their personalities or identities, showing a lack of trust towards each other. The exuberance displayed by the set design of the VIP rooms was absolutely immaculate. The lorgnets, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right, those things, and the VIPs quoting Shakespeare that's not Shakespeare, gives the games a level of theatricality. People of various sizes and colors are not only there to serve, but are even objectified to the point of being used like pieces of furniture. It was a great display of how deep into the underworld the rich would reach to satisfy their sexual and violent desires. The servants aren't just objects of entertainment, but of sexual gratification too.
I'm gonna keep this one next to me. Any objections?
Not at all. As you please.
He's all yours.
The VIP's private room displays erotic art all over its walls, making it abundantly clear what this man's intentions are. I only have one minor complaint about this episode, and that's how Junho was able to escape from the facility with the use of diving equipment. I understand that some police officers are trained to dive through specialization, something that was never hinted at by Junho's character in the show at any point. Otherwise, this episode was top-notch, definitely one of the best in the series. The colliding tension between the named characters playing the game, as well as those that were observing the game, and Junho's great escape. Actually, this latter point about Junho is worth talking about first in my review of... Knowing that Junho will be appearing in Season 2, I am very curious to know what convenience stopped him slamming his head into a rock at the bottom of the cliff right here. Also, what the hell was up with the frontman breaking the golden rule of COVID? The real core of this episode was the triangle of sadness created between Gi-hoon, Sang-woo, and Sebyok. It was great that Gi-hoon finally saw the betrayer that Sang-woo was. He has this naive assumption that success makes you a good person. That dream is completely crushed by the events of the previous episode. Both men lost the two contestants they became closest with, but instead of vowing never for it to happen again, like Gi-hoon does, Sang-woo adopts the opposite tactic. Win at all costs. Even during the game of marbles, Gi-hoon was crying genuine tears of guilt, whereas Sang-woo had nothing but crocodile tears for Ali. More of my compliments go to the set designers here, who had the games literally painted onto the walls of this, hostel bedroom thing. None of them would have seen them with the hundreds of bunk beds originally lined up against the walls. This triangular dinner scene was inspired by both The Last Supper and The Dinner Party, an artwork installation by Judy Chicago. 39 places are set for historically significant women, only one of which was still alive at the time of the installation. A dinner table laid for the dead and those that paved the way for progress. It seems to be the case here in Squid Game as well. The shots of Sebyok unable to eat illustrate the unimaginable pain she must be experiencing. The episode slows down to a wonderful pace when she and Gi-hoon attempt to make a pact, only for Sang-woo to swoop in and put Sebyok out of her misery. Episode 8 doesn't actually feel like it's the shortest of the bunch, but the deaths of two major characters pull enough weight to justify this being one episode in my eyes. The events of will make or break the series. The final fight between Sang-woo and Gi-hoon was absolutely epic. It's dirty, satisfying, well shot, and well choreographed too. It speaks to that sloppiness seen earlier in the series in the fight between the surgeon and the organ sellers. It was also quite satisfying that Sang-woo would end his own life, presumably out of shame. This allowed Gi-hoon to win the cash money without killing a single person. It was at this point I started to find the expository dialogue from the VIPs to be quite annoying.
What is he doing?
What the hell is going on?
456 wants to stop the game.
He's giving up the prize money right here at the very edge of victory.
Gi-hoon wins the prize money and gets thrown back into the outside world. I appreciated that the PIN code to his bank account was his player number, as well as the sadness of him finding his mother, who had died in pain and alone. It's not a big dramatic moment with the way he repeats himself and tries to reassure himself that everything would be fine. All of it was handled really well. The saddest thing is that even if he hadn't left to play the games, he probably wouldn't have been able to save her, but he could have at least been there in her dying moments. That's what makes his return feel so hopeless. Having all that money won't bring his mum back, nor will it bring his daughter back to Korea. An entire year then goes by with Gi-hoon leaving the money untouched. He then gets invited to see Il-nam on his deathbed, which was quite an intriguing scene. The reveal that he was the mastermind behind the entire operation recontextualizes the entire series. He is first seen counting the players to presumably make sure the games were entirely fair to him. Him being player number 1, the only elderly player, the one one person grinning throughout the whole of the first game, having a strategy to win tug of war, all were clues throughout the series that indicated he was the big bad. The most disturbing factor for me was him presumably faking his dementia as a test for Gi-hun to see if he would play fairly. With this revelation, you have to wonder if he was genuinely struggling with his age. Were the headaches and the bedwetting all just to manipulate Gi-hun? Even though it seemed like he had everything, he was only able to gain a feeling of some kind by playing these games. The philosophy of equality for those inside the game seems to stem from him, though how an exception was made for him troubles me. He could have easily been killed at any time before this. How was he protected the entire time? How was he not furious that he was spared death and thus treated with discrimination? Ultimately, I think the final game isn't to show an insistence on fairness, but more to illustrate that faith in humanity is possible, even if Ilham never lived to see it. You may lose faith in humanity by the time you get to this point in the show, but hell on the outside might not actually be as bad as we originally thought. This is what persuades Gi-hun to see his money in a different light, not as something that he won through blood money, but to actually use it for good. Despite Ilham promising Gi-hun some answers, I was quite happy that he didn't spill out all of the answers on his deathbed. For example, we never find out how the facility found all these people that are full of crippling debt. I think it would have been nicer if the first series gave us the complete picture, but the aim of a TV show is always to secure a second series, even if it was never meant to go on longer than intended. This is why a show like Squid Game keeps a lot open whilst being satisfying enough to keep people intrigued about the world it presents. Now that both a second and a third season have been confirmed, I hope that some fleshing out of the character Junho occurs. He is a character that I believe would have benefited being introduced in the second series, with Gi-hun using his money to fund an investigation into the organization. Hiring an infiltrator to go in on his behalf would have been an interesting setup for the second season. Instead, it seems like Gi-hun himself is going back in for a second round of games, but alas, I'm getting ahead of myself. The most bizarre moment of the finale for me was when Gi-hun decided to dye his hair red. The only concrete reasoning I found for this was in an interview with writer-director Hwang Dong-hyuk, claiming that it represented his anger and to show his inability to return to his former self. Like, what? This was a really bizarre explanation for me, so I pulled my wife aside and said, "Hey, what's this moron doing?" She gets her hair dyed regularly, and her opinion is that he did it as a gesture of turning over a new leaf. Much like the director's explanation, she says that the dyeing shows a change of character. However, she also noted that Gi-hun would need multiple dyeing sessions in order to achieve that particular red color. Apparently, there's no way somebody with hair as dark as his would simply walk into a barber's and come out with hair looking like that. As for the rest of the post-Ilham death stuff, it's even more baffling. How exactly did Gi-hun track down Sebyok's younger brother? Gang isn't exactly an uncommon surname in Korea. Is there genuinely nothing to stop random strangers from taking little kids out of orphanages? And how did Gi-hun explain to Sang-woo's mum his connection to this little boy? This stuff was honestly a little too ridiculous for me. As nice as it is to have Sebyok's wishes fulfilled on an emotional level, logically it just doesn't make any sense. The conclusive scene at Incheon Airport, though, it seems a little too coincidental that the suited guy from episode 1 would be playing the envelope flipping game on the other platform. We learn from the phone call with the frontman that Gi-hun is being watched, or at least that's the impression we get. I'm guessing what happened was that the suited guy warned the organization that he nearly had a run-in with Gi-hun at Incheon Airport, and so deduced that he was about to get on a plane to see his daughter. They could easily put the pieces together on him considering how much information they had. It's why I like all these shots of him being filmed from behind, as though he's got genuine reasons to be looking over his shoulder, but not doing so. The defiant stride away from his escape makes it very clear that putting money in the right places alone won't make the games stop. I don't think he could face his daughter knowing such evil in the world would be allowed to exist. So, did it suck? For the most part, it's a big resounding no. It's clear from this exploration that there is a good reason behind the success of this series. This is a great example of a single writer-director pouring his heart and soul into a project. All 9 episodes were written and directed by the same guy. How insane is that? In an interview with Vulture, Hwang Dong-hyuk concisely describes what makes Gi-hun such a great protagonist. Squid Game is not intended to be a story of hope for society with some wishy-washy portrayal of a hero. We cannot expect such self-sacrifice of ourselves nor each other. I wanted to ask viewers how we can navigate this cold world of vicious competition together when each of us are merely weak and ordinary individuals. I think that's what hits hardest about this show. It's a brutally realistic portrayal of human beings in extreme conditions, with some great characters to follow along the way. Ultimately, though, Squid Game isn't successful in coming up with a suitable remedy for changing the environment that made the creation of the games necessary in the first place. Having said that, this is something that is alluded to in the Season 2 trailer. Season 1 is definitely not flawless, but it's a lot better than most of the other crap Netflix churns out on the regular. I give Squid Game Season 1 an 8 out of 10.